My ex-wife told me she wanted a split and said to speak to her legal rep, so I did. It started with the smell of burnt toast, not metaphorically. I mean literally, I had over-toasted the sourdough again. The crust had blackened into that acrid kind of char that clings to your nose hairs and coats the air with the suggestion of something dying slowly. I remember scraping it half-heartedly over the sink, flacking black crumbs into the drain, and thinking, Jesus, even my breakfasts are failing now. The kitchen was quiet. No music, no TV in the background, just the soft hum of the fridge and the way the old pipes sometimes groaned when the heater kicked on. It was a late Sunday afternoon, though it felt like time had melted into this blurred, beige thing with no texture. We hadn't spoken more than 2 sentences to each other all day. I stood there, coffee mug in one hand, trying to decide if I had the energy to make new toast when she walked in. Elena. She was wearing the gray sweater she always said made her look like a suburban ghost. Her hair was pulled back, not messily, not neatly, just pulled back like she couldn't be bothered. She didn't look angry, or sad, or anything really. She looked like someone walking into a room to flip off a light switch they'd forgotten about. She didn't sit down. That was the first sign something was off. Elena always sat during conversations, even fights. She said chairs were anchoring, said you could say anything to someone if you both agreed to be still for it. But this time she stood, arms crossed, leaning against the counter like she didn't plan to stay long. I think we should split, she said. Just like that. No soft entry, no slow build-up, no I love you but. Just those 5 words, flat, clean, clinical. And then, if you have questions, you can speak to my legal rep. I blinked. For a second I thought she was rehearsing a line from a film, that maybe she'd been cast in a courtroom drama and I'd walked into her monologue. What? I asked, because it was the only thing my mouth could form. She nodded toward the envelope on the counter, manila, fat, sealed, like a homework assignment. That has everything you need, she said. I didn't move. I stared at the envelope as if it might move on its own, sprout legs, run away, or explode. Anything but just sit there. I noticed then that she wasn't wearing her ring. It hadn't occurred to me to check earlier, but there it was, her bare finger, pale where the metal used to rest. I don't understand, I finally said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, weaker, smaller. She exhaled through her nose, like this was the part she dreaded, like I was confirming some terrible prediction. You do, she said, you just don't want to. The thing is, she was right. Because I did know. I knew when she stopped laughing at my jokes. I knew when we stopped touching each other absent-mindedly in passing, when her hand no longer brushed mine when we reached for the kettle, or when our knees bumped under the sheets and we both instinctively pulled away. I knew when we went from sleeping together to just sleeping next to each other, both facing opposite walls like we were guarding our own small, invisible countries. But I didn't know it would end. I thought we were just paused, frayed. I thought things could still be sewn back together with time or effort or maybe just one really honest weekend. Elena, I started, stepping forward, but she flinched, so subtly most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. It was the kind of flinch that says, don't make me feel guilty for this. That's when the panic started to rise. I could feel it clawing up from my chest, behind my sternum, a pressure that made breathing feel like a deliberate act. Wait, I said, can we talk about this? She shook her head, not angry, just done. I don't want to talk about it anymore, she said. I've talked about it for a year, you just didn't hear me. I sat down on one of the kitchen stools, knees suddenly too weak to stand. What changed? I asked, even though I knew. She paused, looked around the kitchen like she was memorizing it for the last time. The chipped tile behind the stove, the wine rack that had been empty for months, the watercolor print she bought from a street artist in Lisbon and swore made her feel calm like salt water. Nothing changed, she said. That's the problem. That's when it broke inside me, not dramatically, not loudly, no yelling, no slamming fists, just a quiet rupture, like the sound of thin glass cracking under slow, steady pressure. I think I nodded, or maybe I didn't, I can't remember. I kept looking at the envelope like maybe it would say something to me, explain something she couldn't, but all it did was sit there, smug and silent and final. She left the room without another word. The front door didn't slam. She was always gentle with doors. She believed the way people opened and closed doors said everything about them. I used to think that was poetic. Now it just made the silence feel sharper. I stayed on the stool long after she was gone, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually, I got up, walked out into the driveway, and got into my car. I didn't take anything with me, not my phone, not my wallet, just keys. I drove until I ran out of places that felt like they were part of my life. I ended up in the parking lot of a grocery store we used to go to on Sundays. The one with the ugly blue signage and bad lighting. The kind of place that always smelled like bleach and overripe bananas. I parked and sat there. The dashboard clock said it was 5:42 p.m. The sky was the color of old bruises, purple and yellow fading into gray. That's where I cried. Not like a movie cry. There was no screaming into the void, no fists pounding the steering wheel, just quiet sobs that came in waves I couldn't stop, tears soaking my collar. The kind of crying you do when you realize you weren't holding on to a person, you were holding on to a memory of who you thought they were. I watched people walking in and out of the store, carrying bags of cereal, laundry detergent, eggs, normal lives. I wondered how many of them had broken hearts hiding behind their shopping lists. Eventually, I wiped my face on my sleeve, turned the car off, and called Matt. I didn't tell him what happened, just asked if I could stay the night. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Yeah, of course." That night, lying on his lumpy couch, I stared at the ceiling fan rotating slow circles above me. I kept thinking, how did we get here? And more terrifyingly, where do I go now? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing for certain. Something had broken, and it wasn't just my marriage. It was me. The first morning after, I woke up in a strange room with someone else's furniture, someone else's framed posters on the wall. I'd forgotten where I was for a second, the way you do in hotel rooms after long flights. Then it came back, thick and fast, like swallowing too much water. Matt was already up or gone. I heard a mug clink somewhere, and the smell of burnt coffee hovered in the air like a hangover. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, tracing the tiny crack running from the far corner to the ceiling fan like it was some sort of map. I felt outside myself, like I'd left my body and was now watching a version of me trying to remember how to be a person. I hadn't brought a change of clothes. I still wore yesterday's jeans and the t-shirt that had a small mustard stain from lunch 2 days ago. I smelled like sleep and sweat and unspoken things. My phone had 12 missed calls from work, my sister, 2 unknown numbers. I turned it off. I couldn't go home. I didn't want to see the stillness of the house with her not in it. The way her absence would make everything echo louder. Her toothbrush missing, her shoes gone from the entryway. I pictured the empty space in the closet where her sweaters used to hang, and it made my chest tighten like a fist was pressing down on it. I wandered into Matt's kitchen. There were dishes in the sink and a note on the counter in his lazy scrawl. "Make yourself at home, coffee's awful, you've been warned." I poured a cup anyway, sat at his small round table, watched a bird peck at crumbs on the fire escape through the cracked window. The city felt too large, too indifferent. That first week was a fog. I went back to the house once just to pick up some clothes, toiletries. She wasn't there. She'd coordinated it with Lori, her legal rep, so we wouldn't overlap. thoughtful, I guess, or maybe just efficient. Walking into the house was like walking into a crime scene where the body had already been taken away. Everything was still in place, but something essential was missing. The air was wrong. The bed was made, her nightstand empty. The fridge still had our magnets from Spain, but the photos were gone. I stood in the middle of the living room holding a pair of socks like I'd forgotten what they were for. Then I grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing things in at random. Shirts, shoes, one of my hoodies she used to wear. I caught myself smelling it before I packed it and hated myself for it. That night, I checked into a shitty motel near the train tracks just to be somewhere else. I lay in the scratchy sheets watching the ceiling while the room trembled every time a train passed. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was aggressive. Loud in a way silence only gets when your brain refuses to shut the hell up. I kept playing the last conversation over in my mind, like maybe if I replayed it enough times I'd catch some hidden message in her tone, maybe a flicker of regret in her eyes. But no, she'd already left me long before she said the words. The real exit had happened somewhere else, maybe months before, maybe in one of those nights we went to bed pretending things were fine. I started avoiding people. Texts went unanswered. I told Matt I was fine. I was, but what was he supposed to say? What could anyone say that wouldn't just bounce off the part of me that had turned to stone? Eventually, I got a part-time job. My savings were running low and I couldn't stay on couches forever. The job was at a hardware store on the edge of the city, family-owned, fluorescent lit, the kind of place where time moved slower and nobody asked about your past. There was something comforting in the routine. I stocked shelves, swept aisles, counted screws and bolts, answered basic questions from confused homeowners trying to fix their own sinks. It was the opposite of my old job marketing for a mid-tier tech company, all buzzwords and fake smiles and deadlines that meant nothing. That life felt like it belonged to a different version of me, a man with a wife and a future and a standing Tuesday dinner reservation. At the hardware store, no one asked about her. No one knew about the house with the blue tile backsplash or the dog we talked about getting but never did. There was a girl who worked weekends, Jess. She was younger than me by maybe 10 years, mid-20s, I guessed. Tattoos on her knuckles, hair like she cut it herself in a mirror with scissors she didn't trust. She was funny in that dry, don't give a shit way that made you laugh before you realized you were doing it. She'd make jokes about customers under her breath, not cruel ones, just observant, sharp. She caught me zoning out once during a shift and tossed a roll of duct tape at me. "Earth to sad guy, you good?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. Not a full one, more like a weak chuckle that felt like it had to crawl its way up from deep inside my chest. "Just tired," I said. "Uh-huh," she replied unconvinced, but she didn't press. She offered me a ride one night after my car battery died. I almost said no, but the rain was coming down sideways and I didn't have the energy to wait for AAA. We drove in silence most of the way, Radiohead playing low through her speakers. Fake plastic trees. I hadn't heard that song in years. It used to be on a mix CD Alina made me in college. I stared out the window, trying not to let it mean anything. Jess didn't ask questions. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, eyes focused ahead like she understood that talking isn't always the thing that helps. She dropped me off with a simple "see you Monday," no pity in her voice, no concern, just that dry, simple tone. It stayed with me longer than it should have. The nights were still the hardest, when everything slowed down and there was no shelf to stock, no customer to help. Just the shape of the life I used to have, lingering in the corners like dust you can't sweep away. I kept thinking, is this it now? Is this who I am? The guy who got left, the guy who didn't see it coming. Some nights I made lists in my head of the things I'd done wrong, times I'd shut her out, times I hadn't asked how she was feeling, things I'd let slide. But the truth is, that's not a game you can win. It just loops back on itself until you're drowning in half memories and hypotheticals. I kept telling myself I was surviving. But I wasn't really living, not yet. I was just drifting, waiting for something, anything, to pull me back into myself. And I didn't know then that the thing I'd eventually have to face wasn't her. It was me. It happened on a Tuesday. I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car outside the hardware store, halfway through a lukewarm sandwich and scrolling my phone for no reason at all. Just the usual rhythm, numb thumb movements, skipping over ads, news, lives that weren't mine. And then I saw her. Not on my phone, not in a memory. Her. Elena. She walked right past my windshield, maybe 10 feet away, wearing a green coat I didn't recognize, her hair shorter. A tote bag slung over one shoulder, too full, the kind that leaves a dent in your clavicle. She looked different, but not dramatically so. Not new life, new woman different, just more distant, like she belonged to a colder planet now. She didn't see me. I ducked instinctively, as if she might somehow feel my stare from the driver's seat. My heart started hammering in that stupid, unmistakable way, fight or flight, but neither option made sense in a parked car in broad daylight. I waited until she disappeared around the corner. Then I got out. I don't know why. Maybe I was following her. Maybe I just wanted to know if I still existed in the same reality she walked through. She went into the grocery store, the one we used to go to, the ugly one with harsh lighting and that weird hum in the freezer section. We used to joke that the place looked like it hadn't been updated since 1998, and we'd pick the same cashier every time, Brian with the ponytail and faded tattoos, because he never asked how we were. We liked that. I walked in after her, told myself I was just getting a bottle of water, something stupid and harmless, but I tracked her without meaning to. Saw her near the frozen aisle, holding a bag of peas, staring at it like it might tell her something important. I almost left, almost walked out, and spared us both the moment. But she turned, saw me, her eyes widened for a half second, just enough. She said my name, softly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to. Daniel. I nodded, my throat already tightening. Hey, I said, and suddenly my voice felt unfamiliar in my own mouth. We stood there, two people with shared histories and no script. The freezer buzzed behind us. You look good, she said, cautious. I wanted to laugh or cry or tell her not to say things like that just to be polite, but I didn't. So do you, I said, which was a lie, not because she looked bad, she didn't, but because seeing her made me feel like I'd fallen through a trapdoor I didn't know was still open. There was a beat, then I asked it. Why didn't you talk to me before all of that, before the envelope and the lawyer and the silence? She looked down at the peas, then at me. Because I didn't trust myself not to stay. That hit harder than I expected. It knocked something loose. My jaw clenched, my hands curled into my jacket pockets. You couldn't even give me a conversation, I said. You couldn't even give me that. You would have tried to fix it, she said gently, and I wasn't fixable anymore, not for you, not in that life. I wanted to shout, to tell her she robbed me of the chance to show up even if I was late to it, that people grow, that we could have tried. But I didn't, because beneath the ache I knew she was right. I would have tried. I would have made promises I wasn't ready to keep. Not because I'm a liar, but because I was scared of letting go of the thing I thought defined me. I was still there, I said, even if you were. I was trying. Maybe I was late, maybe I was blind, but I wasn't done. She looked at me then, and I saw it, not regret exactly, just a long, tired sadness, the kind that's been carried too long in the same muscles. I know, she said, that's why I had to leave. The rest of the store faded. I didn't notice anyone else walking by, any announcements overhead, just us in a cold aisle full of old ghosts. I nodded slowly. There was nothing left to say. And then she said something I didn't expect. "You seem lighter now." That one landed differently, not cruel, not patronizing, almost like a gift. I shrugged, or just hollow, I said. She smiled, but it was a sad one. Sometimes there's not much difference. We didn't hug, we didn't exchange numbers or make promises to catch up sometime. We just stood there, and then we didn't. She walked away, back into her new life. I stood in the frozen aisle for 5 more minutes, staring at the frosted glass, letting the cold numb my fingertips. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood still for what felt like the first time in months. And then I left, drove back to work, didn't tell anyone. That night, I sat in my apartment, the one I'd finally moved into a few weeks earlier, and I listened to fake plastic trees on purpose. This time, I didn't skip it. I poured a glass of wine, I lit a candle, I let myself feel everything. I pulled the hoodie from the back of the closet. The one that used to be hers smelled like dust now, not her perfume. I put it on anyway. And then I looked in the mirror. For a long time. And I said out loud just to hear it, "I forgive you." Not her, mate. That was the moment, not loud, not cinematic, but it mattered. Because I meant it. It's strange what becomes sacred when you're trying to begin again. For me, it was the mornings, not the grand, sweeping kind with sunrise jogs and meditation rituals, no. Just the simple act of waking up alone in my new apartment and making coffee, the gurgle of the old French press, the way sunlight pushed itself through the cracked blinds and stretched across the floor like it was trying to touch something it hadn't in a while. I started leaving the windows open, even in the cold. I liked the sound of the wind moving through things. It reminded me that the world was still here, moving forward even when I was. There was no epiphany, no single moment where everything crystallized and made sense. Healing didn't come like a tidal wave, it came like drips from a leaking faucet. Slow, inconsistent, barely noticeable until one day I realized the silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. I painted one wall of the apartment green, a soft, mossy green that reminded me of a forest trail we'd once hiked together back when things were light. She would have hated the color. That was part of why I picked it. I got better at being alone, not just being by myself, but with myself. I started reading again, books with complicated characters and no clean endings. I took long walks with no destination, watched the same tree change across the weeks. I stopped trying to categorize how I felt. Some nights were still hard. Grief is sneaky like that. It curls into bed with you just when you think you've locked the door. It has good memory, too. It knows your weak spots. But I stopped fighting it. When it came, I let it sit beside me. I let it speak. I stopped being afraid of my own sadness. Jess and I stayed friends, sort of. She drifted out a few months after I started really getting better. No big falling out, just life pulling people in different directions. She texted once in February, "You seem more alive now. I like that for you." I told her thank you, that was all. I didn't date for a long time, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to drag anyone into a story I hadn't finished writing. I needed to be whole enough on my own that I didn't need someone else to finish my sentences. Eventually, I took her name out of my phone, not out of bitterness, just clearing space, like airing out a room that had been locked too long. I found new music, new foods, started making soup from scratch. The first batch was terrible, too much salt, not enough anything else, but it felt like something solid, a ritual. One Saturday morning, I saw a kid on the train reading the same book Alina had loved in grad school. For a second, my stomach twisted, but it passed. I smiled. Some memories are just memories now. I stopped measuring my days by what I'd lost, started asking different questions. What do I want to build today? What's still possible for me? What can I carry forward without dragging the past behind it like a chain? I made peace with the fact that I'll never be the same man I was when I met her. But I'm also not the man she left. There's something quietly beautiful in that, not triumphant, not better, just real. The other day, I passed a couple arguing on the sidewalk. Nothing explosive, just the kind of tired, aching conversation that happens when people start pulling away without meaning to. And for a moment I thought, please talk to each other, really talk. Then I let it go. Their story isn't mine to rewrite. Mine is quieter now, and smaller and softer. But it's mine. And I'm still writing it, one slow, imperfect day at a time.